Teachers, hello! My name is Sarah Smith. Welcome to Lead to Teach, and welcome to the first of 3 sessions that we're going to do about correcting problem behavior in your classroom. How do you respond to disruptions of off-task noise or movement? As always, you can download guided notes at leadtoteach.com if you want to fill something out as we go through this. But I want to start by talking about the why of correcting. Why is correcting so important? And I'll just give you a real-life anecdote, if you don't mind. I remember earlier in my career, my principal came to me one day and he said, "Hey Sarah, the superintendent wants to come and visit your classroom tomorrow at 10:15. Would that be okay?" And my response was, 10:15 is when we go to recess. Would it be possible for him to come at 10:30? And I still remember so vividly that my principal kind of looked at me in dismay and tilted his head a little bit and said, "Sarah, if the superintendent asks to visit your classroom, you say yes. You don't say, could he come at 10:30 or could he come tomorrow because that works better with my schedule. You say yes and you make it work." And a little bit chagrined, I said, okay, yep, 10:15 would be just fine. And I remember, even though I felt so embarrassed in the moment, I'm really grateful that he gave me that corrective feedback because it helped me to realize that I was being kind of rigid in my behavior, not just in that instance, but with other faculty members in general, with the speech language pathologist and the resource teacher and the music, art, and PE teachers. I was kind of considering that my needs and my wants for my students were king and disregarding what everybody else needed and wanted. So that feedback that year helped me not only to be more successful in that instance with the superintendent, but for the rest of my career to be a better team player. And I'm grateful that he gave it to me. So I'm coming back to our expectations model. Do you remember this? That we've said if you want an expectation to maintain, it has to be supported by feedback. Always, always, always praising and affirmative, but corrective as needed. So it's this corrective side that we're going to talk about today, but I just wanted to put it within the framework of the expectation model. This is why this is so important, is because it will help maintain those expectations. So if you had asked me pre-grad school what I thought about when I heard the term correction, I think I would have told you 2 ideas. I would have said, well, you correct, and I'm not totally sure what that looks like, but you just do it, and then you cross your fingers, and you hope that it lands. Post-grad school, post this 3-year program in applied behavior analysis, I think I would tell you the same thing about corrections that I told you about affirmations and praise, and that is that it's a lot more complex than I once gave it credit for being. So now what comes to mind when I hear the term corrections is that there's multiple components. There's a non-vocal component to correcting, there's a vocal component, and then if those aren't enough, there's a redo and removal component. So we will talk today about the non-vocal and vocal components of correcting, and then redo and removal will each be their own session. Okay. So I want to acknowledge first why we sometimes hesitate to correct kids. In my work as an instructional coach, here's what I often hear teachers say is that they hesitate to correct kids because they love them. I love my kids and I want them to know that I love them. Sometimes they hesitate because they understand their trauma. They say, I understand where this kiddo is coming from and how hard his life is at home. And I want him to know that I understand that and that I empathize with that. And then probably the most common reason I hear cited by teachers is that they say, I want my kids to feel safe. I want them to know that regardless of what's going on elsewhere in their environment, my classroom is a safe and a positive place to be. And I think at the heart of all of these comments is this idea that if I have to choose between being beloved Miss Honey from Matilda or dreaded Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter, I'm picking Miss Honey every time. That's the type of teacher I want to be. But I think it helps at this point to remember what a correction is. Ready? The definition of a correction is a response meant to stop a disruptive behavior from persisting. So this is a picture of a teacher's classroom after one of her kiddos flew into a fit of rage and just engaged in a lot of property destruction. You can see that materials have been thrown and broken, papers have been torn and shredded. And of course, this was not a quiet incident. It was accompanied with a lot of shrieking, a lot of crying, a lot of yelling, a lot of profanity. So a correction is a response meant to stop something like this from happening, not only for the sake of the student in question, but for the sake of the students around that student as well, right? So I'm going to come back to our question and tweak it just a little bit if you don't mind. Instead of why do we hesitate to correct kids, why should we correct kids? Well, because we love them, because we want them to feel valued by us as their teacher. Why? Because we understand their trauma. We understand that regardless of how hard their background is and what's going on in their lives, education is their best chance for success in society. Why else should we correct kids? Because we want them to feel safe. We don't want them to be in an environment that's really noisy and chaotic and disruptive and sometimes even destructive. That does not feel safe. So why should we correct kids? For the very same reasons that we sometimes hesitate to correct them. Let me give you a real life example. My daughter, when she was 15, asked if she could drive on the freeway, and I thought this would be a good experience for her, an opportunity for me to teach her about freeway driving. But I said, okay, if you're going to do this, I have some conditions. You have to stay in the right-hand lane. You have to go the speed limit or maybe even 5 miles under. And you have to listen to what I tell you to do immediately. Even if you don't understand it, you have to respond to what I tell you to do right away. And of course, she's really eager to drive. So what is she doing? She's saying, okay, yeah, I can do that. And I remember that she was doing that. She was doing really well on the freeway until we came around a corner. And I could see as we came around this wide turn that across the 6 or 7 freeway lanes, all the cars were slowing down and stopping. I could see all the brake lights lighting up. And what did Isabel do? But she kept going at 65, 70 miles an hour. She just keeps flying. And as her mom, what did I do? I freaked out and I said, Bella, whoa, stop. And she kind of jolts and slams on her brakes and says, okay, geez, I'm stopping. And we had to have a conversation about how it's not that I don't like you. It's not that you're in huge trouble. It's that when you see brake lights lighted up on the freeway, you need to take that as a cue to also brake so that you don't cause a 50-car pileup. So remember, a correction is a response meant to stop a disruptive or a destructive behavior. Here's what the research tells us, ready? Is that contrary to popular misconception, teachers who adeptly correct problem behavior, in other words, who are good at correcting problem behavior, create environments where students feel, ready for this, I love this, safe and successful. And not only safe emotionally, and not only successful academically, but behaviorally as well, right? So teachers who are good at that create safe and successful student environments. By contrast, teachers with permissive approaches tend to encounter higher levels of disruption, kids being off task, non-compliance, kids not doing what the teacher has asked them to do, and severely emotional student behavior. They're emotionally overreactive to things that happen in their environment. And unfortunately, I saw this firsthand a couple of years ago. I was in a 2nd grade classroom where the teacher had a really permissive approach. She wanted the kids to be able to talk during work time. She wanted them to be able to talk during transitions. She wanted them to be able to call out during instruction in the name of, I want them to know that their voice is heard in my classroom. And this teacher also had 2 what she called cool down corners in her classroom where the kids could go at any time if they needed to cool down. If they felt their stress or their anxiety rising, they could elect to go to these cool down corners and just take a minute to unwind, to collect themselves, and then re-enter instruction or whatever task they were doing. And unfortunately, what I saw as I visited this teacher's classroom, this highly disruptive off-task classroom, is that kids were electing to go to these cool down corners all the time, all day long, just one after another. And I don't believe it was just in an attempt to get out of work. They really did seem to be emotionally stressed and emotionally overreacted. There was a lot of crying. There was a lot of heads on desks. There was a lot of vocalization about, leave me alone. I don't want to do it. I can't do it. It's too hard. This doesn't make sense. There was a lot of that happening. And we had to have a pretty hard conversation about how this is not typical behavior of 2nd grade students. And possibly the reason that they are so emotionally overreactive is because the environment is so chaotic. So my experience supports what the research has also seen. So here's the good news. Ready? The good news is that when it comes to correcting, whether you're perceived as Miss Honey or whether you're perceived as Professor Umbridge, depends on approach. It doesn't depend on whether you're giving the corrections or not. It depends on your approach, how you deliver the correction. So I want to talk for the next part of this about how do you correct then? How do you correct appropriately, effectively in both the non-vocal and vocal realms? So, caveat, ready? Although, if you are still validating callouts, if kids are still calling out during instruction or during work time, the best corrections in the world will not be enough. And if you have, I was going to say excessive downtime, but it wouldn't even have to be excessive. If you have even moderate levels of downtime during your day where kids don't have a task or activity at hand, then the best corrections in the world will not be enough, which is why there were those 2 videos earlier in this series about attending to callouts and preventing downtime, because those are 2 problems that will overtake your classroom faster than almost anything else. So be sure that you're mindful of those pieces first before we talk about corrections. Okay, a non-vocal correction we're going to say is using the body to signal a desired change in behavior. So we're using body language to tell kids that we need them to do something differently or to show them they need to do something differently. Why consider non-vocal corrections? Why would we want to start here? Well, because guess what? For some of our students, a non-vocal correction is enough. This is a picture of my cute niece, Artemis, and she is one of these kiddos for whom a non-vocal correction is enough. If you look at her and you frown even just a little and shake your head even just a little, like, oh, she very, very quickly attends to that and checks her behavior and says, okay, then I'll do something different. She's very naturally compliant and obedient and people-pleasing. She's just always been that way. So for her and kids like her, a non-vocal correction is enough. Why else consider non-vocal corrections? Well, because they don't interrupt instruction. You can continue the flow of your lesson and do a shake of the head or use proximity to move closer to a student and not interrupt the learning of the students if you're good at non-vocal corrections. Okay, last one. Why else consider non-vocal corrections? Because they give teeth to your vocal corrections. And admittedly, this was me kind of just wanting to use this picture of my other cute niece, Aria. But I think about her and I think, there's only so many foods she can eat where she doesn't have teeth yet. There's only so far her gums will take her. But the same is true when it comes to corrections. Your non-vocal corrections will only take you so far before you have to also move to vocal correction. But your vocal corrections will be more effective if they're supported by the non-vocal cues. So they work in tandem with each other, just like teeth and gums do. Okay. So I'm going to give you 3 strategies that you can consider for how to correct non-vocally. And they are proximity, facial cues, and gestures. When I say proximity, it's as simple as moving closer to a student in an effort to prevent, reduce, or stop a disruptive behavior. So if I walk by the student or if I go and stand near the student during my instruction, that's called using my proximity. And here's what this makes me think of. I have a younger brother who sometimes will ride with me in the car, and it's so funny, but it doesn't matter where we go. He has this uncanny ability to spot police cars. And every time we're driving together, I will hear him say, "Police." And what do? As the driver, I immediately brake. I immediately pump my brakes or push on my brakes, even if I haven't been speeding. But just the presence of that authority figure is enough for me to check my behavior and make sure that I'm compliant with the law. So we use that same idea in our classroom, that as the authority figure, we use our presence to help kids check their behavior and make sure that they're meeting expectations. The research tells us that the degree of active supervision by adults and not the supervisor to student ratio accounts for the most variance in problem behavior among students. So it doesn't necessarily matter how many adults you have in a room full of kids. What matters is how actively those adults are supervising. So 2 adults who are actively supervising, or even 1 adult who's actively supervising, will be far more effective at reducing problem behavior than 10 adults who are chatting in a circle and not even looking at the students. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about proximity. Let's move next to facial cues as the next component of a non-vocal correction. Facial cues are designed, I guess they could be designed that way, defined as using a facial expression in order to convey disapproval of a disruptive behavior. So things like frowning or removing eye contact or raising eyebrows and widening the eyes, anything you do with your face to convey disapproval of a disruption falls under the facial cues category. So the reason I have here that you don't want to do it like Zell is because Zell is a teacher with whom I worked a few years ago, who would always give corrections and accompany them with smiles and nods. So she would say something like, "Oh, Tate, we're not throwing our pencil across the room, okay? Tate, we're not throwing our pencil, okay?" And even though she was maybe saying the right words, her corrections fell flat every time and her kids were really non-compliant, I think just because she was conveying approval by her facial expressions, by her body language. So something that she and I worked on is conveying with your face and with your body that, no, it's not okay to throw your pencil across the room during instruction. Tate, we're not throwing our pencil. And I'm serious about that. Okay, that's all I'm saying about facial cues. Gestures then is the third part of a non-vocal correction. So we have proximity, we have facial cues, gestures. Gestures are defined as using an action in order to convey disapproval of a disruptive behavior. So something like shaking your head or putting your finger to your lips or using your fingers to indicate that kids need to scoot in closer to their desks or tables, something like that. I'll give you a quick tip about non-vocal corrections, and that is that non-vocal corrections should pass the earmuff test. In other words, if I had on earmuffs and I couldn't hear what was being said, I should be able to tell just by looking that a correction was happening. I should be able to tell by the teacher's use of proximity or facial expressions or gestures that some sort of correction was happening. So to put this to the test, here's what I'm hoping we can try. I have a video with some clips that have corrections in them, but I've turned off the sound, and what I am hoping you can do is just see if you can identify when the correction is taking place. At what point is the behavior corrected? Can you tell just by watching what indicates a non-vocal correction? Okay, so did you see some of the following? Shaking head or making a more serious face. Gesturing by putting finger to lips or folding arms to indicate that students needed to put arms on top of desks, or using proximity to walk closer to a target student. If you identified any of those, then you're on the right track with non-vocal corrections. 10 points for you, yay! But recall, non-vocal corrections are typically most effective when they're combined with vocal corrections. Usually these are paired together. So a vocal correction is just defined as telling students the desired behavior to perform in the presence of disruption. A kid is off task somehow and you're going to tell that kid what to do differently. Why would we move to vocal corrections? Here's why. In a nutshell, because they are the clearest and quickest way to indicate a desired change. The reason I have a picture of my cute nephew Gabriel here is because he's kind of the opposite of Artemis. Remember, Artemis is the one you can just kind of frown at and shake your head and she'll check her behavior. If you were to do that to Gabriel, kind of frown and shake your head, he would look at you and smile like, oh yeah, what else can I do to get attention? What else can I do to push the limits? So for some of our kiddos, non-vocal corrections are not enough, and a vocal correction, telling them what behavior to perform, is the clearest, quickest way to indicate to them that they need to change something in their behavior. So I'm going to give you 3 must-haves in order for vocal corrections to be effective. They need to be specific, they need to be given directly, and they need to be given immediately. So we'll look at each of these more specifically now. Get it? As we come to specific. A specific vocal correction is just telling students the desired behavior to perform, which sounds a lot like the definition of a vocal correction, doesn't it? But when you tell students the desired behavior to perform, you want to be sure you tell them what to do with their body, what to do with their mouth, and by name. So if it's a group infraction, then you would say my class, or second graders, or boys and girls, something to get the attention of the group. And if it's an individual student, you would use that individual student's name. I have heard some teachers say that they've heard that you should never ever give an individual correction. You should never call a student by name in the presence of a large group because you don't want to shame that student or embarrass that student. And to be honest, I've never come across anything like that in the research. I've not seen that that's supported in the research. What I have seen is that your approach is what matters, that it's absolutely appropriate to call a student individually to change a behavior, but your approach is what's going to make or break how effective that correction is and whether you preserve the relationship. So just in case you're worried about that. Okay, so let's suppose, just as a quick example, that the class is lining up noisily. The correction, telling them what to do differently, might be, my class, your mouths are closed, we're going quietly. And while we're here, can I just say for just a second, I student taught with a woman who was just phenomenal, such a masterful teacher. And something I noticed that she did to help her students always be on task and high achieving, it was when she gave corrections, she spoke in the present tense. So she wouldn't say, my class, you are going to close your mouths and then we're going to go quietly in a minute so that we can go quietly, right? She spoke as though the kids were already compliant. And this is not something I've read in the research, that you should speak as though kids are already compliant in the present tense, but it's something that I found to be wildly effective with vocal corrections. So it's something that I'll recommend to you if you want to try it, but speaking in the present tense as though kids are already doing the behavior that you want them to perform. However, I would caution you against these common mistakes. These are common pitfalls in terms of vocal corrections. Avoid these at all costs. Ready? In terms of a vocal correction, don't ask. You wouldn't ever want to say something like, students, will you please line up quietly? Because then you've just invited kids to be able to say what? No, I won't. Thanks for asking. Next one, don't observe. Wow, lots of you are being really noisy right now. You may as well have just said, wow, it's really sunny outside today, for all the good that is going to do in shaping behavior. Next one, don't scold. Don't fall into a habit of shaming kids in order to get what you want. You guys should know how to line up by now. How old are you? Here's what the research tells us about that, is that teachers who resort to making harsh or critical comments may actually see an increase in disruptive behavior in their classrooms. I remember several years ago just observing this. I wasn't working with this teacher as a coach, but it's something I just observed in a hallway. The teacher stopped her students, put her hands on her hips, and said, my class, your hallway behavior right now is an F. Do you know what that means? That means you are failing. You are so noisy. You are so loud. You are disturbing all of the classrooms up and down this hall. I'm giving you an F for your hallway behavior. And because she was so harsh and so shaming at that point, you might have thought that she would turn around and walk away and the kids would just fall silent and stay silent. And that's not what happened. They fell silent for a minute while they were listening to her, but then as she turned her back and kept going, guess what happened to the noise level? It started escalating again. Kids don't respond to shaming the way that they do to praise and true vocal corrections. Okay, last pitfall to avoid is don't be vague. I wouldn't want to say something like, uh-oh, Kaden, and furrow my brow because I'm not telling Caden then what to do differently. So if you don't mind, let's just do a couple of practices. Which category does this response fall into? A teacher says, uh-oh, I hear a lot of talking right now that I shouldn't hear. That would be which one? Asking, observing, scolding, or being vague? Of course, that's observing, right? I'm just observing student behavior. Teacher says, you guys know better than to play in your desks. That would be scolding. I'm shaming the students trying to shame them into compliance. Teacher says, second graders. That's being really vague, isn't it? Second graders what? What do you want us to do? Can everyone please sit down on the rug? Can everyone do that for me right now? Thanks for asking. Probably not all of us will. Okay, next one. Teacher says, okay, everyone, that's enough. That's pretty vague. What's enough? Teacher says, what did I ask you to do? Oh, I hear this one a lot. You're asking, you're not correcting. Teacher says, wow, we are having a hard time working today, aren't we? Wow. Well, thank you for your observation. Some of you are making poor choices right now. That could be an observation. It could also be thought of as scolding, right? That could fit into either category. And then this last one is my favorite one. Make a better choice. You know better. Make a better choice. Oh, I hear this all the time. Guess what? That's really vague. And it's very often ineffective in changing student behavior. So I'm going to repeat this just because it's so important. In terms of vocal corrections, the most important component is to be specific, to tell students the desired behavior to perform with their body, with their mouth. What do you want it to look like and what do you want it to sound like? What should the change be? Here's a quick tip in terms of vocal corrections is that vocal corrections should pass what I'm calling the blindfold test. In other words, even if I couldn't see what was happening, I would be able to tell just by the teacher's correction, by the teacher's level of specificity, what the infraction of the rule had been. I would be able to tell what needed changed and thereby what the student had been doing incorrectly or disruptively. Here's what I heard a teacher say once, and I loved this. She said, I always think to myself, what do I wish the students would do instead? And then that's what I say. And of course, she doesn't say, students, I wish you would line up quietly, because that feels permissive, right? But she thinks to herself, what do I wish they would do? And then that's what she says. Okay, so vocal corrections have to be specific. They also have to be given directly. And we're going to define a direct correction as using a no-nonsense tone when telling students the behavior to perform. In my mind, I always think about channeling Professor McGonagall, because Professor McGonagall is so good at stating exactly what she wants and being firm about it, but not harsh about it. Here's some other synonyms, though, in case these help you. When you're giving a vocal correction, you want to be matter of fact. You want to be authoritative, not authoritarian. I'm not militant, but I am the authority figure in the classroom. I'm non-emotional. I'm not going to get overly upset about this and reactive to this. And I'm also unapologetic. I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry that we need to change this behavior. So those are some other synonyms that align with giving a direct correction. So let's suppose kids are fidgeting in desks. Well, let's practice being specific and direct at the same time here, can we? Kids are fidgeting in desks. What do you wish they would do instead? You wish they would stop fidgeting in their desks, but of course we're going to tell them what to do instead of what not to do. So it might sound something like, everyone, your hands are on top of your desks. And I hope you're noticing the non-vocal component too, right? I'm shaking my head. I'm conveying disapproval through my facial expression. And maybe I'm also putting my hands like this to indicate, yep, our hands really are on top of our desks. And you might notice too, I've put all of these in present tense. Okay, let's suppose the class is talking at the start of the lesson. What do you want them to do? You want them to stop talking. So tell them what to do instead of what not to do. It might sound something like, my class, your mouths are closed. That would be a vocal correction that's direct. Let's suppose Jace is tapping his pencil during instruction. You want him to stop tapping his pencil, but then what is he supposed to do with his pencil? He's probably supposed to put it away or park it somewhere. So I could say, Jace, park your pencil. And maybe I even use proximity and kind of walk closer to him. Jace, park your pencil, as I say that to him. Okay, last one, let's suppose Megan is whispering during work time. I want her to stop whispering. I want her to do her work. So I might say, Megan, you're working quietly right now. You're working on your page right now. And I'm being direct about that, but I'm not being harsh and I'm not being authoritarian, even though I am authoritative. Okay, third component then, if you want your vocal corrections to be effective, is that they need to be given immediately in the face of the problem behavior. So here's my definition of immediate, is using a 0-second delay between when an expectation is stated and when students are vocally corrected for potentially not meeting that expectation, that I'm going to respond immediately. And let me just say right now, while I'm thinking about it, sometimes planned ignore is appropriate. In certain instances, there are kids that have an individualized behavior plan, or that if you give attention to the behavior, it's just going to make it worse. So in isolated instances, yes, it is okay to ignore, but in general, and for the most part, you respond immediately to problem behavior of individuals and groups of students. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you, I think, an additional clip and then some of the same clips as you saw previously. But what I'm hoping you can watch for this time is what might be the benefits of correcting specifically, telling kids what to change, using a direct tone of voice, and immediately. What might be the benefits of correcting specifically, directly, and immediately? And take the CK in the air like it's proud that it got to be at the end of the word. Let's try it. We'll start after a short vowel. After a short, I'm gonna stop. I need everybody's feet all the way down, chair scooted up. Yep, Shavi, just like that. That's perfect. Go ahead and scoot up just like Shavi. Thank you. Okay. It will have more than one syllable. It will have more than one syllable. So I could code the word can super easily. Check your hands, make sure they're on your desk. Thank you. Much better, Cole. Thank you. Thanks for fixing it. I could code the word can super easily. Helping. Nice job. Your ticket to putting this away is to check to see if your name is at the top. Light and super fast, dude. Thank you very much. First graders, Connor, we're not talking. We're just quietly putting this in our folders. If you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand. Connor? A consonant E. It's just a friendly E at the end of those words. Okay, first graders, before I show you anything else, I need hands down on your desk, and I need chairs scooted up. James, we're not laying down. Your head is all the way up at school. Yep. Thank you. Thank you for fixing the problem. Those of you that were already sitting like that, thank you very much. So this is a friendly E syllable. Right with me. The reason it's called a final syllable, I'm going to tell you. The reason we would say final, first graders, I can't have kids who have a pencil in their hand. I need pencils parked. I need chairs scooted all the way up, Leighton, just like that. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Chairs are scooted all the way up, and arms stay on top of your desk. Thank you. That will help you learn better if you sit exactly like that while we're talking. Thank you. The reason BLE is called... Okay. You may have come up with something different, but in my mind, the main benefit of correcting specifically, directly, and immediately is that disruptions didn't escalate. I don't have disruptions that grow to a point that they're unmanageable and require a lot of outside interventions if I catch them quickly, if I nip them in the bud, as my cute grandma used to say. Okay, this is something I think that you probably already know, but it's important for me to say it so that I know I said it. And that is that corrections should always, always, always be followed by a thank you or a much better when the student complies. Why? Because you still want to preserve that relationship. So if Jace is tapping his pencil and I say, Jace, park your pencil, and he does that, I would immediately want to say, yep, thank you. Or I would want to give a thumbs up, yep, much better. Or, yep, that's what I was looking for. That's what I was talking about. That's much better. You're going to get a lot further with those praise statements and that preserving the relationship than you will with continued corrections. Do you recall how often we should praise our students at what ratio? Do you recall what that was? Wasn't it 2 to 1? Meaning we should be twice as often affirmative as we are corrective. praise is always, always, always going to be more powerful in shaping behavior than corrections. One other thing I'm hoping you can recall already is that connection is, do you remember this? The primary deterrent of trauma-related problems. When we have kids that are angry, that are acting out aggressively, that are lonely and feeling excluded, that have difficulty concentrating on tasks, or that engage in highly emotional behavior, connection to a trusted adult is the primary deterrent of those trauma-related problems. And I hope you notice these are two N's, not two R's. It's not correction is the primary deterrent, although correction is usually a necessary component. It's connection is the primary deterrent of those problems. So I wanted to say that as a quick reminder, even though we've been talking a lot about the importance of correction. Okay, so in summary, corrections are most effective when, do you remember this? We're going to talk about non-vocal and vocal now, just as a quick review. Corrections are most effective when combined with non-vocal cues, when stated specifically and directly, and when offered immediately in the face of the problem behavior. Sometimes teachers then say, but what if the vocal correction doesn't work? Like, what if I'm doing all of that non-vocally and vocally and it still doesn't work? I'm still not getting compliance. Don't panic. That's next time. We will come to that. But last question, I'm hoping you can just think about what's something you liked or learned about correcting disruptions. For me, it's this idea that when used effectively, corrections create feelings of safety and not stress. I think that's the biggest misconceptions that I've seen teachers have is if they correct, they're going to create a stressful environment for their kids, and it's just not true. Corrections have the opposite effect of making kids feel safe and successful academically and behaviorally. So I will see you for part 2 of correcting next time. Ciao.